Got in touch to say that their niece is a nurse on their way to work this morning. She gets the bus to a London hospital. It has been very quiet until today, and now it's packed. Boris's speech has confused a lot of people, and now my niece is worried there will be a spike in infections. So we've just heard from Dominic Raab that the instruction to go back to work actually isn't until Wednesday. Clearly, a lot of people think that that is from today. The advice was don't use public transport. Well, how on earth are you supposed to get to work if you do use public transport? I have no idea how social distancing is being policed on public transport. Do get in touch.
Apparently, he said on airport quarantine,
you know,
now we have got the virus down. There is Dominic Raab talking to another channel because he won't come on ours. On airport quarantine, now we've got the virus down, there is a risk that people coming in from other countries could bring it in. Really? Really? You've just realised that there's a risk of people bringing the virus into this country? Dominic Raab? If you were on this programme, if you had the guts to come on here and answer questions, I would say, why is it taking you 3 months, Dominic Raab? You were in charge of the country when Boris Johnson was off, sick. Why is it now that you realise that there's a risk that people coming in from other countries could bring it in?
And how has the science changed if they're following the science?
90% of the world's countries took precautions at airports, including lockdown, including quarantine, including testing. Guess who was in the 10%? The UK. And now Dominic Raab announces on behalf of the government there's a risk that people coming in from other countries could bring it in. What was our scientific expert advice for 3 months that led you to not do this before? Why have you allowed 18 million people, Dominic Raab and Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock? Why have you allowed 18 million people, many from coronavirus-ravaged countries, to stream into our country for the last 3 months?
Without testing or quarantine.
Given that on January the 30th, the World Health Organization called this a global health emergency. Why? That's my question for you. No wonder you don't want to come on here, because that's the question that you can't answer, can you? None of you can answer it. We've been asking it and getting no answer for weeks. We first started asking ministers about this 5-6 weeks ago. Why are the airports not doing anything? Nothing. And now, when we have the second worst death toll in the world, by the government's own charts that they show us every day, we're number 2. So you can spin it any way you like. You can make yourself sound as successful as you want. It doesn't change the graph you show us every day. Second worst death toll in the world.
And what do you say to nurses getting on public transport, which is now packed, who have to go to hospitals and care for COVID patients? How do you reassure them that you are not going to see a spike in reinfection?
And how do you reassure people in care homes? So there's 11,000 care homes in this country with 400,000 elderly people, many of whom will be veterans of World War II that we celebrated and acknowledged on Friday with VE Day. And they're in care homes now, where you've allowed people, without checking if they're negative, to go back into care homes from hospitals with COVID-19 and infect and kill people. And now there's a second epidemic on care homes because none of you took it seriously enough. None of you had the right equipment for care home workers. None of you had the right testing to test anybody there. So I know why you're not coming on this programme. It's called cowardice, because you don't want to face these questions. And it's a disgrace, as has been your failure to adequately protect our health and care workers, your failure to get testing in this country, to stop people dying, and your ongoing failure now, where you now suddenly decide that our airports should be shut. What a shambles. The most basic person in this country could have told you 3 months ago, you know what, be careful who you let in, we're an island. Other countries did it, New Zealand, Australia, other islands were very draconian about who came into their country on aeroplanes, but not us. We knew best. We were following the science. Our experts knew better than everybody else's. And what's the result? Second worst death toll in the world. That's the result. So, Mr. Raab, if you want to come on, we've still got an hour and 20 minutes if you want to come on and answer some supplementary questions to these interviews you've been giving. because I've got a few questions for you. Number one, why did nobody in the British government realise for 3 months that it might be a risk to have 18 million people coming into this country without any checks or quarantine? Number one question. I'll think of some more after the break. What is she? Deputy Chief Medical Officer, right? Yep. She's the one who said that it was a good idea to go ahead with Cheltenham. She was the one put up that day, thought that was a great idea. She's now describing our preparation as an exemplar. Let's watch what she said yesterday.
The UK, regardless of the position that we may be in now or commentary, has been an international exemplar in preparedness. We had a containment phase and it was very successful. If you remember, we had planes coming in from Wuhan. We quarantined people under very strict quarantine.
Sorry, so let me get this straight.
I'm not sure how the containment phase would have been successful.
We have, including the what is believed to be now over 7,500 people in care homes who've died. That takes our total of deaths in this country, Dr. Hillary, to over 23,000. That makes us third worst in the world. We've got over 80 NHS and care worker staffs who've lost their lives. And the Deputy Chief Medical Officer has the brass neck to go on national television yesterday and describe this as an exemplar to the world. And says that our containment phase was tremendously successful. She sounds like Comical Ali, that fool in the Iraq War, propping up Saddam Hussein. It's complete nonsense.
I don't know which country in the world would put its hand up and say this was an example of what to do.
Our country just did, Hillary. Seriously?
If you look at Sweden, they're in big trouble now because they only had this intelligent lockdown where they trusted people to behave responsibly, and now they're in great problems with the number of people dying in care homes. In the United States, they're even worse. They're still not in lockdown, really, anywhere other than New York, and they're seeing a huge rise in cases.
I'll tell you what is an exemplar,
people on the beach
Hillary.
in Florida.
Here is an example.
Right now.
Germany would be my idea of an exemplar.
Well, let's wait and see.
Well, OK, let's wait and see. But right now, because of their strategy of intensive testing...
Almost 2 million tests.
...and isolating people, so 10 times as much as we've done. And we've had this debate, but these are facts.
And they were much better resourced from the beginning, with 4 times as many intensive care beds,
but they are the exemplar,
more PPE,
aren't they?
more testing. I agree with you.
Right, so they are the international Templar. We are not. We are actually a shambles, in my opinion. And I just think that for the government briefing to have a Deputy Chief Medical Officer boasting about how successful this has all been. It's been a total disaster.
Well, I think you can look back and say we should have done things better, we should have had more resources. Of course, the NHS should always have had more resources. You could say we should have had lockdown earlier. Was the British public ready to go into lockdown early? Do you remember we had a well-known journalist from the Daily Mail saying that our lockdown was disproportionate and too early? So there were as many voices saying we don't need lockdown yet. We should have done it earlier. And you and I discussed the Cheltenham issue, which was clearly not containment by any
we've
stretch of
discussed the
imagination.
airport situation, which I think it remains to me utterly staggering that we are one of the only countries in the world that hasn't made any attempt to stop any flights coming in. We now have 15,000 people a day coming from places like New York and Italy and China, corona-ravaged countries.
Without
they don't
testing
get
them.
any check when they land here. And yet we're telling, grandmothers you can't go and sit on a park bench because of the risk of transmission. And yet 105,000 people a week are pouring into this country at airports all over Britain with no check. And I'm not going to go into the details of how I know this, but I know for a fact that going the other way, that when a plane load of people went to another European country in the last week, they were being repatriated, that when they were, a very significant proportion of the people on the plane, when they were tested, turned out to be positive for COVID-19, despite displaying no symptoms. And this comes back, Hillary, to my gut feeling about this airport thing.
But what happens once they've been tested and they're symptomatic and they've arrived in a country? What then happens?
Well, in that country, they get quarantined.
They get quarantined. They're advised to isolate, aren't they?
But here's my point. we don't make any attempt to establish if anyone getting off these planes into Britain has COVID-19. And many of them may well be asymptomatic, like they were on this particular plane, going from here elsewhere. And my point, Hillary, is if you're sending in 105,000 people, many of whom may be asymptomatic with COVID-19, into our country, it makes a total mockery, total impunity and selfishness and recklessness.
And
shame on you,
examples
Mr. Grealish. And
all weekend of people flashing.
well, you got idiots, more idiots playing football. Police had to get involved because they're all playing a big game of football, contact sport. Why? Why would you do that?
There was even a
karaoke
party, wasn't there, for 25 people?
25 morons
that had to be split up by
Derby
police.
decide to have a karaoke party. Look at the lavish spread they put on. We got that, and there were mostly adults, load of kids. There's the karaoke machine. But there's the big spread. Look, huge old party. Happy days, huh? Happy days with people dying, people risking their lives to save ours. All you have to do is just stay at home and obey the rules. That's all you got to do. And it's just completely beyond people to do this. There is a section of our community that doesn't care. And, you know, how can you blame them when you have a politician, Stephen Kinnock, son of former Labour leader Neil Kinnock, driving from Wales, where his constituency is, to London and to wish his father a happy birthday, posting pictures of himself pretty close to his father, right, on there. And the local police say, well, that's fine. We know celebrating your dad's birthday is a lovely thing. This is not essential travel. Stephen Kinnock then said, well, I was taking them, essential supplies. Really? You were driving as a Member of Parliament from Wales to London to take your parents' essential supplies? Were you, Stephen Kinnock? Or were you just going to wish your dad a happy birthday? Your dad's a great man, great leader of the Labour Party. Nothing against him having a good birthday. It's my birthday today, right?
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. But the point is, I'm not expecting my parents to rock up in their car to wish me happy birthday because it would be dangerous for them. It's actually very simple. And I'm sure there's somebody a little bit nearer than Wales who can get essential supplies to your parents.
And also one of
London.
the reasons why they're saying not to get in your car and why they're saying don't go and drive for a
Well,
walk,
where did
for
he stop
example,
to get petrol?
You've got to get petrol, you've got to get out, you've got to touch everything at the garage in order to do that, and therefore putting other people at risk at the same time. So just don't do it.
No, he said he was taking necessary supplies. Well, what were they? What were these necessary supplies? Oh, yeah, maybe you were, Stephen Kinnock. Maybe you had to drive hundreds of miles using petrol stations and all that, which should be there for essential workers. Maybe you were taking essential supplies. I've seen lots of people defending this MP. I'm not defending it. Sorry. You can wish your dad a happy birthday on Skype or FaceTime. My family, every Sunday now, 5 o'clock, we all Zoom in, talk to my parents. That's what everyone else is doing. And when an MP does this, it says to people, oh, it's OK. Can't be that serious. Can't be that serious.
Maybe we should redefine the word selfish to mean people who think that the concept of behaving by the rules only applies to other people, not yourself. It's just incredible. If I just remind those people doing that one doctor has already died on the front line in this country.
And 2 other doctors have died as well.
And 50 in Italy. 50 doctors have died treating COVID-19 patients in Italy because this is a really nasty virus. And people are behaving like that because they just don't get it.
A driver, North West Motorway Police said a driver had been caught on a 224-mile round trip from Coventry to Salford in Greater Manchester to buy £15 windows on eBay with his wife in the boot on the return leg. A tourist was stopped in Devon after driving his motor home from Birmingham. An officer said Birmingham to North Devon is not in the spirit of fighting the virus. You think? You think you have to tell people this? Really? Just stay near your home. That's all you got to do. This is our contribution to the war effort, and people cannot get it into their thick skulls.
And the issue is that will then go on for longer. We're already hearing now it could be 6 months before life goes back to normal. And if people continue to flout the rules like this, then potentially even longer.
And Boris Johnson has repeatedly said that his people have sort of said that one of the reasons why they didn't want to put us into lockdown earlier because they didn't think people would have the stomach for a long fight.
They were worried about the lethargy. They were worried that people wouldn't be able to stick it out.
I found this a ludicrous notion that this generation was not being asked to go to war over trenches. We've discussed this. They're not being asked to go and actually fight for their country. to defend our freedom and liberty, like the Second World War generation, would be the lockdown has ended. They just haven't said it's ended. And they're basically...
No, it hasn't for everybody, has it?
Well, pretty much, yes, because the police have now said they're not going to enforce it, which means that basically anyone can do anything. And unless to be honest, unless it's people like us who are well recognisable, anyone can go out and meet anybody. How would you know who they're meeting? Nobody knows who they're meeting.
No, but we have to trust society to be responsible. That's why we're giving them the information on which to base what they do and how
Have you seen the streets? Have you seen the roads? Have you seen the parks?
See the buses. We've got pictures of the buses from yesterday.
This is the bus yesterday. It's back to normal, Hillary.
And you know what, Dr. Hillary? I do not blame people for not social distancing, because how could you possibly organise with strangers staying 2 metres apart?
But this is what happens when you say... I trust the British common sense. This is what British people will do if basically the message is, oh, it's no longer stay at home, it's be alert. But they just go back to normal.
But some people don't have a choice, do they?
Exactly.
They have to.
Actually, everybody on a bus has a choice to stay 2 metres from somebody.
You don't have a choice.
No, here's my point.
When did you last get on a bus?
No, I've been on a bus.
Unless there's 4 people on a bus, you cannot stay 2 metres away from anybody else.
I was about to make my point. When you leave a bus, as they were just doing, right, you could, if you wanted, wait, and then someone gets off, and then...
Piers, where do you wait on the bus and you're not next
you're missing
to
my
somebody
point.
else?
I'm not criticising the people. I'm not criticising the people on the bus. I'm saying they're just going back to normality, and it's very, very difficult to maintain, as I said the other day about even outside a shop, a 2 metre thing. So because it's so difficult to maintain, in fact impossible, as we've seen from that bus, that's been replicated all over the country. The lockdown is over. I mean, they can call it what they like. But the lockdown is now, as we can see from that bus picture, I don't blame any of those people, because the message from the government is no longer stay at home. And this kind of lack of social distancing is happening all over the country.
The only way you could have social distancing on a bus, surely, is if the bus companies say we're only allowing 6 people on a bus.
But they're not going to, and they've not been told to. So, of course, they're not going to. And the government wants the economy to be back. They want the bus companies to make money. We may end up in 3-4 weeks with a wave of new infections and deaths. I mean, we don't know, do we?
No, we don't know. And I think public transport is one of the major risk areas because people can't socially distance. The tube, the bus, the coach, aeroplanes, people are sitting close together or standing close together. They can't socially distance. Face coverings are advised in that situation, but offer limited, there's limited evidence that they're effective in protecting you or stopping droplet infection from people who are asymptomatic but have the infection. And I think that is a real worry. You're quite right, the virus hasn't changed, it's still out there, and there's probably more people infected now than there were at the end of January when we had our first 2 reported cases. And that's why the return to work has to be very slow. It has to be socially distanced. So if you're going to an office, you still need to be 2 metres away from the next person.
But Hillary, none of this is happening.
No, I think some of it is happening, but not enough.
Hardly any.
And that is why NHS staff are really worried about a second wave.
Yes, and I would be too, because the danger remains exactly the same. The threat remains the same. Our ability to tackle this virus with a vaccine or drugs at the moment is non-existent. So nothing has changed. All that's changed is we've gone from millions of people being inside to now millions of people being outside and mixing with other people on public transport and in workplaces.
All we've done is reduce the risk slightly because we're asking more people to work from home, and many people have found that they can do that and will continue to do that. Many firms are saying we're not going back to work for many months with our employees, which is good news. But, yeah, we've reduced the risk from effectively seeing 800, 900 deaths a day to less than that, but it might only be 300.
Can I go and see my 2 sons I haven't seen in 10 weeks? Can I go and see them today and maintain 2 metre distance, yes or no?
As far as I would be concerned, I do not speak for the government, as long as you maintain social distancing in what you do, that will not allow
This is the problem, Andrew Bridgen. You see, what you've just said is completely against the new rules, as stated. So there you are, a Conservative Member of Parliament who thinks you know exactly what Boris Johnson has been saying, and yet you've just told me to do something I'm not allowed to do. So this is the problem, isn't it? There is no clarity. It's a load of old flannel talking about controlling the virus, and you, as a leading, high-profile Conservative politician, haven't got a clue about what these rules actually mean. And you're an MP. You're part of this.
Piers, I did hear your diatribe against the Prime Minister earlier on. What you've got to remember...
When you say diatribe, let me explain what my diatribe is. We have, according to the government's own graphs, and you can spin them any way you like, the second worst death toll in the world, and that's just the deaths that we're declaring at 31,000. The real figure, according to any detailed analysis of the ONS figures, is over 55,000 people. It's an absolute national disgrace when you compare it to almost any other country in the world. We've had no testing. Our Deputy Chief Medical Officer said we didn't need testing, it wasn't appropriate, so we stopped doing it, which was a total scandal. We've had no PPE for the NHS frontline workers and care home workers, which is why over 200 of them have died. It's an absolute national disgrace. And when you come on and say, I heard your diatribe against Boris Johnson, the diatribe is because so many people have died, and so many people are continuing to die. And yet, even today, yesterday, Boris Johnson announces, oh yeah, we're going to bring in quarantine at the airports 3 months after other countries did this. 3 months after countries like China and South Korea did this. After 6 weeks after New Zealand and Australia did it. Why are we not doing it before? Why have we decided that our experts seem to know so much more than everybody else's, that we can plough our own little lonely furrow, and then we end up on your graphs, your government graphs, with the second worst death toll in the world? So don't tell me that I'm launching a diatribe against Boris Johnson. I'm holding Boris Johnson to account. I'm holding Boris Johnson to account for a shambles, an absolute shambles from start to finish. That's what I'm doing.
I'm sure there's going to be a full inquiry into everything every government around the world has done to deal with this unprecedented global pandemic. But now's not the time for that. Now is the time for dealing with the issues. That's what the Prime Minister...
Actually, now is the time, Andrew Bridgen, because we're still relying on the same experts. The government still passes the buck in every single time they speak. They keep saying, we're following the expert advice. I would argue that our experts have been following very different advice and giving it very differently to our government to most other countries in the world, including airports. 90% of the world's countries have taken far more draconian action than us at airports. So I'm not really so convinced that we should be blindly following our experts, given that they don't think we should have been shutting down any part of our airports to 18 million people for 3 months, bringing this virus to this country. I'm sorry. It's called common sense.
I have an airport in my constituency, East Midlands Airport. It's a huge employment hub for the constituency, and it's the biggest cargo handler, dedicated cargo handler airport in the UK. So that's still operating to an extent. But you have to remember, Piers, that we are a very densely populated country, the densest populated country in Europe. And also London is the #1 destination. It's the #1 for business from around global business, and also it's the most visited by foreign visitors.
Stop making excuses. Honestly, it's ridiculous.
I'm giving you the facts.
Germany has had a quarter of the deaths that we've had. Germany's a bigger country by 20 million people. Talking has 20 million more people than us. It's a lot of flannel when you start talking about how brilliantly we're doing. Please stop it. You talk about insulting intelligence. This insults everybody's intelligence. All right, we've got to go to a break. Thank you, Andrew Bridgen. We'll come back with our two experts. Matt Hancock is doing the rounds of the media this morning. He's just been seeing lots of tweets from our competitors. Sky News is doing, BBC Breakfast is doing, BBC Radio 4. Interesting to quote The Economist, which came out this week about what the BBC is doing in this particular crisis, which may explain why Matt Hancock wants to do the BBC and not us. The BBC does have a responsibility to provide what the nation needs, said one senior journalist there. It needs to know what's being done about testing. It doesn't need a great bust-up about what's gone wrong. To find balance, but the bosses are keen we come out of this with a sense we looked after the national interest, not just our journalistic values. An extraordinary state of affairs. Anyway, it would explain, of course, why Matt Hancock feels that Good Morning Britain viewers, millions of you, you are not worthy of the Health Secretary's potentially life-saving information guidance, advisories, clarifications this morning. He's going to go on every other show, so their listeners, their viewers, will have that information during the biggest health emergency this country's faced in my lifetime, for 100 years, actually. And I think it's shameful. I think it's completely wrong. And the reason that Matt Hancock isn't doing our show is because the government sent out a procession of extremely poor junior ministers who couldn't answer basic questions about this, and we got annoyed with them because of their failure to know basic things, like how many health workers had been killed because of a lack of PPE, stuff like that you might think is important. And yeah, we got annoyed with them and frustrated and angry on behalf of the families of those health workers, apart from anything else. But our punishment for asking difficult questions and holding the government accountable is that Matt Hancock is now boycotting this programme, as is every government minister, as is the Prime Minister, during the biggest public health crisis we've faced for 100 years. It is a disgraceful way to treat you, the viewers. We can only apologise. It's been going on for 10 days now. You may remember they did all this before, just after the election. They wouldn't come on for a month, and then they came out again. They don't want to be challenged. They don't want to be asked difficult questions. They want to go on the BBC because the BBC's new edict, apparently, is don't ask them too many tough questions about any mistakes. Stick to the bigger picture. Make people feel good. OK, that's fine. Except that, actually, we have the second worst death toll in the world, according to the government's own figures. We've made a series of cataclysmic mistakes. And yes, we should be entitled to ask the Health Secretary, why? Why have we made so many mistakes? And how can you guarantee to us you're not going to keep making them? It's called accountability. It's what journalists are supposed to do.
And it's fairly remarkable that when the Prime Minister says we should all follow common sense, it would be common sense for the Health Secretary to appear on ITV's breakfast programme in the morning.
They don't think your lives matter as much. That's what it boils down to. For the sake of risking a bit of a rough and tumble interview about things that really matter, that affect life and death, they don't think your lives matter as much. They really don't. They have information that's really important, but they're not going to tell you. The Health Secretary doesn't want to tell millions of Good Morning Britain viewers this information. I think it's an absolute disgrace. And if you land from Italy right now, or New York City, which is being ravaged by coronavirus, and you land at a British airport, what happens to you when you land?
Well, I think for most of those individuals, they wouldn't be tested. But that
what do you do with them?
Why that is?
What do you do with them?
The reason why they enter the country if they're able to do so. But the reason
they just come in. There's no mandatory quarantine. There's no nothing.
There's no testing.
You're just letting all these people from countries with heavy COVID-19 death rates just walk into the country.
If you could perhaps let me answer the question.
Well, can you just give me a straight answer?
Is led by. Well, I haven't had any chance to give you an answer whether it was
Please
straight or
don't always play that card. The go-to card for all the government ministers right now is, you haven't given me a chance to answer. I've asked you very simple questions. The clear, simple answer to the Heathrow and Gatwick and other airport questions is, here's the question, give me a simple answer. What do we do to the thousands of people arriving from countries with high COVID-19 when they arrive in our country? Here's the question, do we do anything?
Those individuals who have symptoms are taken down one route. Those individuals who are not symptomatic are allowed to enter the country, which is a different approach to some countries have taken. But that is on the basis of medical opinion, because it isn't always a lot of the tests that you could do in an airport, like testing someone's temperature, for example, are not necessarily helpful or accurate ways of assessing whether someone has coronavirus. So we have been guided in our approach at airports, as elsewhere, by scientific and medical opinion. And I appreciate that some other countries have taken different approaches there. But I think it's always been right that we followed the expert opinion that we've received.
You're also being guided to allow a lot of non-essential workers to continue going to work. And the impact of that can be seen from video taken by ITV News yesterday at North Acton Tube Station, which can show the exact effect of what that means. You know, you're telling everyone to stay at home. This is the scene at North Acton Tube Station. If you just, we're just showing viewers now. You'll see in a moment, and a staggering number of people
They
get off
swarm
one
off the train and then swarm on.
All in.